Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Hannings, and I'm here today to just thank you for being here, for your interest, and for a very important Pernambuco update. I also want to thank John Bennett, who's a very busy man, who has taken time out of his busy schedule to be here to inform you and to answer your questions. He represents us very well at CITES, and you'll find him accessible and well informed. And I'll just turn it over to you right now. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Lynn. It's great to be here and to reconnect with the Federation, which feels like a old home for me at this point after many years. I have a lot of material. I think it's going to be confusing if I've done it right. Um, so I will plow through the material and then I hope that there's enough time for, many questions at the end, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. So I will share my screen and then launch into the slideshow. Right. Is that working?
Yes, it is.
Um, okay, we'll skip the preliminaries. Let me just see one thing here. It's asking me to bypass something. I'm going to jump right into Brazil's proposal. We all know that it was submitted on June 27th, 2025, and they have requested that Pernambuco, as everybody knows, be transferred from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. The proposal is available on the CITES website. I've given a very sort of rudimentary link there, but we can provide a more detailed link to lead you to it if you would like to look through it. It's relatively straightforward in the end. It's several pages, but if you boil it down and oversimplify it, it sets up the fact that the species has been, at risk for several years now and is at increasing risk, and that the greatest threat from Brazil's perspective is illegal logging and exportation. I just note here that the references that it makes seem to be to the same information that was provided in the COP19 proposal. Didn't seem to be a lot of new information, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And they conclude by saying that urgent measures such as an Appendix 1 listing are needed. That's, as I was saying, an oversimplification, but I'm going to get into some of the meat now of the matter, and then we'll see where we are by the end and what questions you might have. So just to remind everyone, the current law calls for permits when all forms of Pernambuco are first leaving Brazil, and that's what's called under CITES an export. And then all subsequent cross-border trade of Pernambuco requires a re-export permit, except, and this is what happened at COP19, for a finished musical instrument accessory or part. So there's an exception just for finished products. Everything else still needs the re-export permit, wood, bow blanks. Oops. At COP19, there were additional decisions, and really this is a scheme that was devised by the parties. I'm going to call it that, an approach to trying to help Brazil implement the Appendix 2 listing. And so certain decisions were made and agreed by the parties, including to collaborate with one another to develop what they call a voluntary marking or identification system, which would lead to traceability. And the idea is to create as much of a global system as possible. And we've been, of course, encouraging that that be a uniform system and be a voluntary system. They also decided that parties should consider, this is kind of light language, but it's the way CITES often works, establishing mechanisms to register bow and wood samples, and we know stockpiles, and we know that some countries already have good systems in place, like Germany. Some have systems in place, like France, where it's maybe quite good at something, but it works internally, but maybe would want to be subject to some more strict criteria if a system were developed in cooperation with all the other parties. And then encouraging Brazil to share information about plantation growth and stockpiles inside of Brazil, and asking, subject to the availability of funding, for the CITES Secretariat to develop a report.
The deal. The Gophers are 58-39 over Flex 8 seasons. They're 6-0 in bowl games.
Sorry. If somebody's they're close, that'd be great. I'm back now for some microphone. Go ahead. Listening to myself. Study Secretary was asked.
Lee, can you turn off your microphone?
Yeah.
That's great. That's much better. Thank you very much. The Society Secretariat was urged to develop and submit a report for consideration. Committees, the Finance Committee and the Standing Committee, with recommendations for consideration by the Conference of the Parties in 2028. And this was, sorry, I keep jumping ahead here. This was the decision that was made most recently at the Standing Committee. There was a meeting in February 2025, and the Standing Committee took a look back at the decisions, the extent to which they've been implemented, and came forward with some new ideas to recommend to the COP that's coming up for revision of the decisions, with a direction pointing toward the COP that's going to be held in 2028. So just to sort of reflect on what we've been hearing from IBAMA, there have been talks given by IBAMA officials in addition to the proposal itself. And, they've been emphasizing, as is mentioned in the proposal, that the Pernambuco populations are at great risk, that there's a lot of illegal trafficking. They indicate that, it's a global market and that there are trafficking problems occurring through the use of fraudulent paperwork and permits, and also through taking wood and sticks out in, and at this point, bows out in luggage. Finished bows have only recently come under domestic control as of June 2022. So there wasn't any permit requirement domestically or through CITES before 2022. And the concern is that now things are continuing to move, but as I mentioned, they haven't really provided much indication of what's happening now. There was Operation Do Re Mi, which many of you probably heard about in I think it started earlier, 2018 or 19, and was brought to light quite a bit in the run-up to the last COP in 2022. They point to the fact that somewhere over 40% of the illegal trade is coming into North America. And they indicate that, in fact, there have been no permits issued inside Brazil after the June 2022 domestic law was implemented. So in terms of legal movement out of Brazil, the government is saying that there's none that's been permitted since that time. They've also said that there are no legal stockpiles in Brazil that are suitable for commercialization. They make the point that the erroneous point that traveling musicians have the musical instrument certificate and that is sufficient, that there shouldn't be any obstruction to the movement of musicians traveling for non-commercial purposes because of the musical instrument certificate. And I'll talk about that in a little while, why that's not right. And they indicate that there have been no plantations registered in the federal system, Sinaflor. Also technically true, but it's a bigger story that I'll get into in a little bit. They've said to us that trees require 80 years to mature, and that it's really unclear how good the wood would be, whether it would be suitable for the making of bows at the highest level. And we've answered some of these claims already, but we're going to be saying more going forward. Despite all that, they're also saying, don't worry, under Appendix 1, plantation wood will still be available to meet future needs. So in fact, we are understanding through, word that we're hearing that there has been illegal cutting. Scientists that we work with have told us about some illegal cutting that's continued in Pernambuco National Park, for example. But the extent of trafficking is hard to read because, as mentioned, the data that's been provided so far by Brazil is older. So it's unclear what's really happening now in terms of trafficking with the tighter regime that they put in place since 2022. And just to sort of state the principle that is obvious, we oppose illegal trafficking, and we try to make that clear every time it's possible to do so. We know that it's if fake documents are coming into our countries, it's not always easy for people not so familiar with what a valid CITES permit coming out of Brazil should look like to distinguish a fake one from a valid one. But there's still a burden on all of us to be vigilant and to be trying to be as discerning as we can and try to understand when something might not be right, and to stand up and oppose it and do what you can to stop it. Just to mention that there have been some concerns within Brazil that it's not fair to have a permit applied only on the first export out of Brazil, the export permit, and not to have a re-export permit. And in fact, the CITES parties, when they made that decision in Panama, that was their adherence to a longstanding CITES principle, which is restrictions should be imposed where the commodity first enters trade from the range state, which in this case is only Brazil. I'll explain a little more. I've mentioned already that the musical instrument certificate is not really a valid solution for traveling musicians right now. And we also know that, in fact, wood can be mature within 25 to 30 years, and we've already seen through some very small pilot demonstrations that the quality of the wood is sufficient in some cases. And so, there's a lot of effort that's been made over the last many years to decades to establish plantations, and we know that there are, some estimate, up to 3 million trees right now. And so the question, I think, really goes back to what the parties decided in Panama, which is, can a traceability system be put in place that will make it possible to distinguish legal from illegal wood and bows. And we've learned, in the last several months and year, but particularly in the last few months, that the science and technology is really there at this point to distinguish plantation wood from wild populations of wood. And in fact, there's a handheld device that's available that there have been 2 demonstrations and presentations recently that have shown that much more than 90% actually accuracy can be established by using this handheld device to distinguish wild populations from plantation wood. So that makes the possibility of tracing wood, understanding its genesis, very promising. Just to tell you some key dates, obviously in the next few months, we're going to be doing a lot of preparation work and a lot of advocacy. We're organized, music groups are working together, bow making organizations are working with musician organizations. Globally, we have more than 50 organizations that we're in cooperation with, and we have certain smaller working groups that are working on drafting documents and information, which will be made available to you to the extent you may have already seen some documents, but there will be more coming, and we are very interested in learning what you feel that you need right now to get informed and to help share information. The conference of parties will be held in Uzbekistan. They decided to give us the longest ride possible. It's November 24th to December 5th. And just want to note that it will require 2/3 majority of the 185 CITES parties in order for the Appendix 1 listing to be approved. So we're looking at and we want to understand where the parties are as we continue our conversations with them. Many of them have heard from us prior to the COP in Panama. They understand our concerns, and we're engaged in dialogue with them on an active basis now. If there are changes made to the current listing, and if, for example, it goes to Appendix 1, that would come into force in March 2026. So just to talk a little bit about the impacts of an Appendix 1 listing if it were to occur. Today, as we know, there are no permits required to trade finished bows internationally. They need an export permit to leave Brazil, and then no more permits are required. Appendix 1 would make all commercial trade and non-commercial trade subject to a requirement that it's demonstrated that the wood or the bow was acquired pre-convention, that is, before September 13, 2007. it's basically effectively a ban on trade unless you can demonstrate that the wood or specimen was pre-convention, which is a very high hurdle, or that it was, as CITES calls it, artificially propagated. And I'm going to talk about that a little more in a minute. I've already discussed the fact that re-export permits, haven't been required until now. They would be required for all international sales if there were Appendix 1 listing. And for imports into the EU has its own rules. Annex A, as it's called. Commercial trade would be prohibited unless the bow was introduced into the EU before 2007, or provably dates before 1947, or the bow was recently made with wood introduced into the EU before 2007. So even higher bar inside the EU. Non-commercial travel, musicians would need a permit and credentialing of their permit every time they cross a border. The difficulty with the musical instrument certificate, there are various difficulties, but some of the main ones are that every time you need a credential, you have to go to an authorized port. And some countries don't really acknowledge the musical instrument certificate at all. Some have very limited authorized ports. The US, I think there are 4 or 5. And inside the EU, it's better. Their movement inside the EU for non-commercial trade would be allowed across the borders, so long as it's strictly inside the EU. So the question of, how to demonstrate that your wood was pre-convention or is pre-convention, it's been, there's some history to Appendix 1 we've seen with Delbergia nigra, Brazilian rosewood. Some of the things that might work, we don't know yet what specific countries would require, and they could each establish different criteria. But a national stock declaration, Germans will be able to avail themselves of that. In the US, US Fish and Wildlife decided after 2007 that they weren't going to undertake creating a national stock registry, and that it should be done on a voluntary basis by the trade. A purchase invoice from a supplier with a date, an import permit, again, with a relevant date. And the US did start accepting affidavits for Delbergia nigra. It's possible that that would be acceptable again going forward. But as I mentioned, very few countries have national stock registration. And as we all know, bows are very often not accompanied by the kind of documentation that would be required. So the question of plantation wood is a big one, because we know on the one hand that very little wood is actually required to satisfy the demand for new bows annually. And at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, there are estimates that up to 3 million trees have been planted, and some of that wood is at sufficient quality. The problem with Appendix 1 is that there's an exemption for artificially propagated wood, but that's wood that has been developed on basically monoculture plantations, ones that have been cultivated and managed. In our experience in the last few decades, I'm not aware, at least personally, of a monoculture plantation, but I'm aware of many, many agroforestry approaches that have been used to grow Pernambuco in Brazil. And actually, agroforestry is ecologically favored because it allows trees to integrate in with other, the species are mixed, and it's better for habitat for wildlife. And that's what's the agroforestry, or sort of mixed production of that sort, is called assisted production. And it is not part of the exemption under Appendix 1. So artificially propagated, okay. Assisted production of the kind that's been done for decades in Brazil and is still being done now, not exempt under Appendix 1. So that would obviously have a huge impact. There was a symposium in December in Brazil. I attended, and several folks attended. It was a scientific symposium. And there was a lot of energy and interest in growing. There was a lot of activity around Brazil, and there's a future there for plantations, but that future would be undercut by an Appendix 1 listing. and farmers that have already been, investing their time and their energy with the expectation that they will have trees in 25 or 30 years that they could sell as additional revenue. That would be undermined by an Appendix 1 listing. So we've also pointed out that, applying a permit requirement to every crossing of a border, whether for commercial or non-commercial uses, would create a massive administrative burden, not just for everyone in the music sector, but for all the CITES management authorities. And that's a legitimate concern that they take on board. When the Rosewood listing occurred, there was a massive uptick in permit requirements, and it resulted in the parties coming back at the next COP and saying, we need to sort of dial this back, and they create an exception for musical instruments and accessories and parts. The second bullet here is kind of obvious. We all know the danger it poses to the trade. And the question that remains at the end of it all would be, how is it benefiting conservation of the tree to require permits indefinitely into the future for one object as it crosses the border over weeks, months, years, decades? Just to give you an idea of what we're doing, as I mentioned, we're organizing, we're talking with national CITES authorities. We've been promoting national stock registration. There is, I think, reason to be hopeful that UK will move forward and launch a voluntary stock registration system in the next months. We're encouraged by that, and we hope it will provide a positive example for other countries. There's a lot of work to be done on that front in getting countries on board with the idea of setting up voluntary systems. It doesn't look like a lot from an outside perspective, but moving a bureaucracy in that direction has been hard and taken time. But it's going to be very important to create a system that will make it possible to verify the source and the age of the wood as part of a broader traceability system. In Brazil, we've been working with a lawyer who worked for the Forest Service for many years. He's been helping us understand developments and keep an eye on things that we might miss from abroad. We're obviously in the process. We've tried to engage. It's been difficult so far. I took a trip down before the scientific symposium in December, and I went to Brasilia and had some preliminary meetings with IBAMA and the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it was very sort of early days, and there's a lot more work. We're hoping that we can engage with the Brazilian government, talk about our different point of view, how we understand Appendix 1 impacts, and see if there's an opportunity to maybe step back from that even before we get to the COP. It might be possible. We're not at all banking on that, but we know that engagement will be important in any case. And we're also doing outreach to music sector members in Brazil to help them, gain awareness of the facts about an Appendix 1 listing and the impacts it will have on them. We've been developing, and I really need to take my hat off to Lynn here for this. She's been working really, really hard, as you probably all know, to put together information materials, many of which are available on the Alliance site. But she worked with Heather Noonan from the League of American Orchestras, who's a really great ally of ours, to develop a Know Your Bow document. Really helps with identifying the CITES covered materials that are in your bows. She put together a declaration of materials template that really is a great tool. And if you haven't seen it, if you haven't used it, I would really encourage you to do that so that you're taking stock of what you have, creating your own inventory for your materials so you're ready for any moment when you might need to demonstrate the age and, to the extent possible, the origin of the wood. And of course, we're putting together informational documents about Appendix 1, and we're sharing them out. We had a great concert in Strasbourg, thanks to IPCI Germany last month. And I know that the Alliance has been organizing all sorts of presentations and concerts and educational outreach. We've also been continuing, principally through IPCI and with the support of the Alliance, to support science in Brazil. And that's something we've been doing for a long time, as we've invested in replanting and working with farmers. We've also felt that it was important to be supporting basic science about Pernambuco because there's a lot that's still not known about it. And we're just very close, I would say, to signing a contract to work with a university in Brazil to set up the first national Pernambuco seed bank. So this will be, protection against the future if the species continues to decline because conservation efforts fall short. This would be a place where the seeds would be stored and available for future generations and future restoration efforts. The scientific symposium in December, we thought that it would be helpful for others to be aware of what was being discussed. So we provided some support to the university and to one of our partners that we've worked with, a trusted partner in Brazil, Instituto Floresta Viva, and they helped to develop what's been called a white paper, which puts together, basically summarizes what was discussed at that symposium, and that's available. I believe Lynn can point you to it, but it's a link on the Alliance site now, and you could take a look at it, and I would encourage you to do it. It's actually a positive set of signals about what's possible in Brazil. And this research that I mentioned earlier that's making it possible to distinguish wild populations from plantation wood, it's part of a broader effort that we've been making and some science that we've partnered with the Federal University of Southern Bahia, great scientist there named Daniel Piotto. This is just to sort of tell you where we've been. I think you all know it, but maybe it's helpful for us all to remember that we've, confronted different challenges in the past, and we've been organized, and whatever happens, we put our case forward, and we hope that there's understanding and awareness of what the impacts will be on the music sector, and hopefully some sympathy and some ability to be flexible and accommodate so that conservation and music can be supported at the same time. IPCI has been an important vehicle for that for 25 years. It was instrumental in helping to get an annotation when the listing first occurred on Appendix 2. By working with the Entente, we were able to negotiate the creation of the musical instrument certificate. We were able to negotiate a de minimis exemption for instruments in the US and UK and EU for their ivory rules. And then in 2018, of course, the Alliance was formed, and that's been a really great, helpful resource to look not just at Pau Brazil, but also across all the species, because the world we're in now, there's a lot of pressure on forests and on species, and we're going to see, the listings at CITES have been going up and up continuously, and so there'll be more pressure on other species that are also of interest and value to the music sector, and we're watching all those things. And in 2022, we brought forward concerns about Appendix 1 listing in Panama, and the parties were persuaded that there is a way forward that can balance conservation and supporting Brazil's implementation of the current listing with music, so that stringed instrument music can continue as we know it. We work, as I mentioned, with this is just a very small handful of the groups that we work with. I won't read through them all, but please feel free if you want to know more about that to reach out to me. And then I just I'm sure you're wondering what can be done. So please stay connected with the Federation and the Alliance and IPCI. We will be sending out updates. We'll be sharing sort of steps that we think would be helpful for you to take. It's probably not a great idea right now to start bombarding CITES management authorities. We want to work with them in a deliberative, intentional way and make sure that they're not getting mixed messages because we're not well coordinated and aligned, but we are moving to do outreach and to help them understand our perspective. And we do really need your help in spreading the word, letting your contacts know, letting your colleagues know, whether they're makers or musicians, whether they're working or retired. Really important to not just let them know this is happening, but to get good information in everyone's hands so that we can deliver our message as effectively as possible. Inventory your wood, as I mentioned earlier, and we'll hope for the best. I won't even say prepare for the worst, but I do encourage you to do that as well. So that's the presentation, and I welcome questions.
There's usually a shocked silence after after you speak, John. Sue is asking the question, would we be able to make bows and sell them in the US?
Yes, this is an international trade agreement.
I think we have to remember that the musicians that we're selling our bows to are going to be traveling around the world. And so we need to be able to provide for them accurate legal information so that they're going to be able to get the certificate that they're going to need. So we have a role to play in this. We don't get a free pass.
I have a question. Um, if you're talking to a musician in your shop and describing this, I just had this conversation with somebody last week, and I sort of came out of it feeling like I'm not sure what to tell them in terms of things they can do. Do you have any suggestions as to how to wrap up that conversation in the most productive way?
You could see from my presentation that it's not easy to be pithy about this, and um, it's complicated. And there are materials right now. Lynn, I'll maybe hand it over to you, but there are some materials that have been developed specifically for musicians that are boiling things down to a handful of bullet points to just create an alert. And I think maybe the best thing to do would be to get that out to all of you and for you to, it's going to be shareable. I think also there will be a link available very soon, if not already, so that you can simply share links or print out pages and have them available for musicians. It'd be a really great and much appreciated thing if you could do that. Yeah, it's a hard thing to do. I had a chance to meet the bass player Ron Carter about a month ago after one of his performances, and I decided I would use my 60 seconds to try to open the door with him on this topic. And I could see he was, interested. He said, well, I'll get to work, but it's very hard to communicate quickly. So maybe we need to also think about, actually, Lynn, and I'm wondering, and Dan, maybe we need to think about not just like a handful of bullets, but what's that opener? What's that like really like 1 or 2 line elevator pitch so that we get people's attention. There's something coming now. Um, there's an opportunity for musicians to weigh in and make it possible for them to travel the world, to continue to travel the world without the need for permits that are going to be very hard to obtain. But that's even that, we just need to like work on it.
We're working right now on a call for action, which would be our next step. The step that the email that just went out, and you all received copies of it, included a Pernambuco fact sheet, which is very simple, one pager. And then there was a QR code at the bottom and a way to also an email, a way to get to the website that brought you to a 2-page document created by John and others with a more detailed but musician oriented. What's the difference and what does this mean to you? So there's a lot of important information there. The next document that's also linked is the Know Your Bow campaign, and that has gone out to all the musicians, orchestras, conservatories, unions. It's gone out in articles, so it's everywhere. And I just want you to know that there's that information and there's more coming. So please do stay in touch and let's work together on this. If you've got ideas, bring them to us. You might have ideas we haven't thought of before, and we might need your not just ideas, but also your physical support. Your jumping in and helping us with things would be great.
Yeah, I mean, for musicians, your ability to travel internationally with your Pernambuco bow is at great risk right now, and we need
Yep.
your engagement and your support. And then here's more information about
I have a question.
it. By the way, they
Would it
need,
make sense for us to tr
sorry, please.
sorry. Would it make sense for us to try to contact our national CITES representatives to try to influence their vote at the upcoming meeting?
Yes, there's going to be a time and a place for that. I think what would be great would be to try to get an understanding um, of what their sort of time frame is for decision making, so that we can think about when and how best to intervene. But the short and the long answer is there's going to be a need for that. And yes, we would like to equip you, David, for example, with the information you will need to let your CITES authorities know that there's a really grave danger to string instrument music that's being posed right now, and that there is no need. There's a better way. We can conserve the species. We can make the plantation wood that exists available. We can get it into the national registration system. They're saying it's not registered now, so there basically is no plantation wood. That should be solvable without going to the extreme limit of imposing an Appendix 1 listing. But we would like to provide you with, the basic set of messages that will help make it possible for you and others to sort of state things clearly and on a fact-based basis. So that information is already, I think the two-page document is available, Lynn.
Yes, it is. I'll resend it to everybody so that you have it. I would also like to say that there's an order of things. There's a timeline going on right now. So if you don't hear from us every day, it doesn't mean that we're forgetting about doing things. We're doing things always. So there's conversation going on uh, that's beyond us. But we have to remember that this information it just arrived to the CITES management authorities from Brazil. We need to give everybody a chance to read that. And remember, we're only one of many, many thousands of species that these management authorities have to get together on, have to learn something about. And we also have to accept that the management authorities are changing personnel regularly. And so there's going to be some updating, some information that has already gone out in past years, so it's already available. And that's going to be sent out so that we can hopefully bring some of these newer members up to speed so that they're better informed to make decisions. But that needs to happen first. And then you're going to get from us a list of how you reach your CITES management authorities, what the link is to get to these people, and just a very short statement, which you can expand on if you want to, but just a very general short statement. We don't want to bombard anybody before they've even had a chance to figure out what you're talking about. It wouldn't be very effective that way. So you're just going to have to work with whatever the timeline is. And I don't know it yet, but that call for action will be coming soon.
I would just say we don't want to bombard people probably ever,
Ever, right?
because CITES management authorities are typically overwhelmed because there are so many species that are the CITES world has been expanding every year, and thanks to pressures on the environment globally, and they're rather overwhelmed. So we're always happy when they make time for us to explain our concerns. And we need to sort of find the right balance of engaging with them and intervening with them in a way that is structured and fact-based and delivers our messages clearly. We're probably not going to be calling on all of you, for example, to reach out to U.S. Fish and Wildlife, because that won't be helpful in terms of our relationship with them. Better to just funnel it. We're representing you, we're representing others. And there may be moments when we will ask you to, reach out to somebody more locally, like maybe your local member of Congress. That will come perhaps at some point, but right now, I think it's good to just sort of take things step at a time, as Lynn mentioned, and know that we're working on it, and we know how to reach out to you, and we'll probably reach out to you and ask for your help. David, your case is a little different because we don't have a strong base in Israel, and you already have some relations. I believe from the past you've engaged with who knows if they're still there. That, as Lynn mentioned, the city's authorities change a lot, so you may need to start from the start again. But you're in a different position than probably the most rest of the folks on this call. So
If I could just add that the one most important thing that I think you could be doing right now is to step back 3 years when CITES gave us recommendations that they wanted to see traceability marking, they wanted to see inventory, voluntary inventory, registration of stockpiles. All of that information that they gave us as recommendations, I took as mandates. A recommendation is like, oh, you can do it or not. But in my mind, this is what we need for the future of this species. This is what we need to be responsible in our crafts. And so I'm asking everybody, if you have not already done an inventory of your wood, now is the time to be doing that. So there's some internal work that we can be doing. And I would love to be able to come back to you as we get closer to November and to just find out, one, how I can help you so that you can get that done, and two, what kind of percentage of support and cooperation do we have? That's information that John can use when he goes to CITES meetings. They've been tracking us. They track every 6 months. They track to figure out what's going on and who's doing what. This is super important, and it's been around for 3 years. And 3 years goes by so fast in our lives, in our shop lives, that I think there are probably many of you. There are people outside of the Federation. There are people who are outside of the bow making community who have stockpiles at Pernambuco. I'm going to ask for your help to try to get as many people to inventory their wood as is humanly possible between now and November, and I will help in any way that I possibly can. But I think that could be a top priority for all of us. If you've done it already, great. But if you haven't, it's not too late. Now is the perfect time to do it. And again, I'm here to help. Any other questions?
Lynn and John, thanks so much for taking the time to come and talk to us today. And Lynn, for what it's worth, I paid my teenager to come and document my wood, or at least get that largely underway for a couple hours during the summer. So thanks for the urging on that. John,
that's what teenagers are for.
Yeah, it's really quite painless if you pay one of them to do it.
Exactly.
John, and it may be too soon given the turnover, but I'm wondering, you said it takes a 2/3 majority to ratify the change. Do these things, if you had any kind of reading on the room, do these things tend to be kind of like, a rubber stamp? Somebody brings it up, the other people look at it and go, yeah, okay, great, and then push it through, or does it tend to go the other way, or is it just completely unknowable?
well, it's an interesting question, and now I guess I'm in my 12th year or so of tracking CITES developments and attending their meetings, and I can't say that the cloud of mystery has been completely dispersed after all those years, but I think there are different levels of interaction that occur. There are regional delegations, and they tend to support one another. Sometimes there is, an interest in supporting one another's initiatives. So delegations can be appealed to on higher levels. Sometimes we've sensed that there's something else going on, that there are negotiations elsewhere, whether they're climate negotiations or Convention on Biodiversity negotiations, where one country, let's say Brazil, wants something in another forum and they're willing to concede something here. I'm using that as an example. With our issues, there tend to be a relatively small handful of countries that are more keenly interested. So the US is one, Canada's one. Mexico pays some attention and is an interested party. Australia, the UK, the EU, and these are, and Japan. These are countries where the trade has its greatest presence and where stringed instrument music perhaps is, more commonly available than some other countries. China is a little bit of a wild card. They're not always easy to engage with, and their sort of voting patterns are, I haven't really been able to say that they've been predictable, but they're important, and we always want to try to engage with them as well. But to try to answer your question, no, it won't be rubber stamped. In this case, what'll probably happen, if it goes all the way to the COP, which is likely, is that there'll be some concern raised when the proposal comes up, and there will be a working group created during the Conference of the Parties, and then different countries, the parties as they're called, will volunteer to join the working group, and there'll be a negotiation by the working group. And it's very time pressured. Everyone has competing proposals that they have to work on. It's very hard to get people's time and attention at the conference parties, but that's what I'm there for, and others, my colleagues are there for. That's our job. And the working group tends to be an effort to try to find a solution that can build a consensus. And so the parties are the ones that do the talking and the negotiating. And I, participated in the last one in Panama, and I was able to speak a couple of times, and some of my colleagues were as well. But a lot of it is sort of our work is done before and after the working group is started. So we try to let everyone know what our concerns are. And by the time it gets to the working group, hopefully they've taken them on board and given them some consideration. And the outcome of that is it brought back to the full plenary. And at that point, if there's a consensus that's been reached around a proposal, it tends to go forward, unless somebody's unhappy and they want to raise a last minute objection, and that can create a little chaos, but it does happen sometimes.
If I can just mention the scope of that, all of these CITES meetings are all available to watch, to sit around and watch every minute of them. And because there are so many species, I think over 40,000, 40,000 species now are listed on CITES. I think John was given 2 minutes or a minute or 30 seconds. You were giving, the time limit kept getting shorter and shorter because they were running out of room. And so, yes, having just the right person at the CITES meeting is important, but so much of the work needs to be done before that actual sitting there and speaking before the parties. That's such a tiny little piece and such a massive job for CITES and for its management authorities. It's really an extraordinary job that they're doing. So we can't think of them as enemies. That's the point I'm trying to make. No one's an enemy in this. We're all hopefully working together for the same important causes.
I mean, after the last conference party negotiation, the leading Brazilian delegate came over to me and said, we love music in Brazil. And so, and I know that. And I told him that I know that. And, so there's, there may be different points of view about the degree of regulation, the type of regulation that's needed, but there are ways to find alignment, and hopefully that'll happen this time.
Any other questions? If questions do come up, because John is so busy these days, if you can forward them to me, I'll group them together and forward them off to John for you. So please ask, and thank you.